I want to talk about this is about that. And let me explain what I mean. Uh, we were meeting with a couple once, and they were at our house, and we were mentoring them. And coming up in the next weekend, they were going to go to her parents' house, and they were arguing about how long they were going to spend there. And he said, "Well, let's just spend a couple hours." And she said, "No, we should spend 6 hours there. Let's get there early. We'll stay late in the evening." And they were arguing back and forth. And so we said, "Well, maybe you guys should compromise." And they would kind of started to compromise, and finally it got down he said, "Well, I'll spend 4 hours," and she said, "No, 4 hours and 15 minutes." And they never closed that 15-minute gap. And it all of a sudden occurred to me, it's like, you know what? This is not about how much time. This is about something much deeper inside of them that's causing this to happen. So the real issues sometimes aren't the surface issues. So there's three levels to how we fight and argue, and we all do this. At the very top level is the topics that we fight about. So in this case, it was about how much time to spend with his in-laws or her parents. But it could be, money, sex, parenting, chores, all the topics that we have conflict about in our life. And that's the topic. And frankly, if that's all it is, you can probably just negotiate a solution pretty quickly. But I think most conflicts go deeper than that. So the next deeper level is how we fight. If you have not read any of John Gottman's books, do that. He is one of the top marriage researchers in the world. And so he has researched marriage to the point where he can tell by watching a couple for 15 minutes with a very high degree of accuracy whether they're going to get divorced or not. In the way that he did his research, or one of the ways, is he had set up what was dubbed the Love Lab. And it was basically an apartment, and the couple would come and live in it for a while. And he would watch them, and he'd watch their interactions. And he would track the results of arguments. And he identified what he called the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And in our class and our online material, we go into this in some depth. So I'm not going to do that here. But this is all about how you fight. So for example, that couple that couldn't agree on how much time to spend with their parents, it was because of the way that they were doing this, and they felt critical, they felt attacked, or they felt ignored. It was all about how they fight. And so part of marriage education and mentoring is to make couples aware so that they start to have can recognize ways that they fight and tear down their relationship. And so part of that is recognizing how you fight. And once you start to recognize how you fight, you can get to the even next level, which is, what are your emotional triggers? Have you ever just lost it? Someone says something and it sets you off and you get angry, or you stomp out of the room or something. I mean, I know I have. And then you think back and you go, oh my gosh, that was just way exaggerated. I should not have reacted like that. And these are emotional triggers, and it's something you hear, or you interpret what you hear a certain way, and it sets you off. And we do this inside of marriage quite frequently. Now, let me tell you one of my triggers and how I got triggered. I used to just invalidate Michelle's feelings all the time. And the way that I would do this, when she would get emotional, that would trigger me. Now, my trigger, I'm not comfortable with emotions, so I would put on my analytical grid. So how I responded was not by becoming angry, but rather becoming more logical. And so then I would tell her why what she's feeling isn't logical and she shouldn't feel that. And, come back to me when you can talk logically about this. And I would argue, her point, and she just felt dismissed. And so she would shut down and she wouldn't talk to me. Or she wouldn't bring it up, and then I felt, okay, see, she saw my point. I won that argument. And this was just dismissive. And so when she asked for therapy, I didn't recognize that there's anything wrong because I didn't think I did anything wrong. But that is the way that I got triggered. Now other kind of deep emotional issues, this can be things like abandonment or feeling worthless, or not being comfortable with emotion that you just feel like I just got to get out of here. Some of these scars can be very, very deep, and they go deep into our childhood and back into our family of origin. So as you're mentoring couples, recognize that what they bring up might have different layers to it. And it might go down in emotional triggers, and part of that might be figuring that out. In just recognizing what those triggers are, and this is how we respond. It's like, oh, that's what's happening inside you. So let me give you some suggestions. First, recognize a conflict pattern. How do you respond? What do you fight about? Is it criticism? Do you then defend? Are you contemptuous and you don't show respect? So what is the conflict pattern that you're into? That's the first step, or one of the first steps. Two, then it's raising awareness. Again, we're going to talk about this a lot, but what's the impact of that behavior? So I didn't understand that when I was dismissive to Michelle, that shut her down. I mean, I didn't understand that, and I didn't understand the impact that she eventually withdrew. And I didn't know that she was withdrawing in part because she was responding to what I was doing. So it's about raising awareness of what is the impact of this. And then your emotional triggers. What triggers you? And how does it trigger you? Now, for some couples, just knowing that and understanding their pattern is enough, because then they can start to figure out, I'm getting triggered. Here's what I think bothered me so much about that. But I'll tell you here, let me put in a plug for psychologists and therapists. Some of these emotional scars can run very, very deep inside of somebody. And I'm a layperson, and this is probably about as deep as I can go. So when I see something that's much deeper, I refer them on to a mental health professional. I say, this might be something you want to get some work on. And I'm a big believer in that. And so I refer them on to therapists. If you are in doubt, refer them to a professional.